No cherished outcome. When's the last time that you were able to go into a situation, goal, a task, a project where you didn't need one specific thing to happen in order for you to feel fulfilled and happy? In an era of optimization and continued need for productivity and growth, coming to this question of no cherished outcome and figuring out how to find simple joy and excitement and fun in your day to day can almost become a skill within itself. Today, I'm going to run through and discuss the Tim Ferriss and Elizabeth Gilbert podcast episode number 770 that Tim and Elizabeth did together. This was recorded back in 2024, where they talk about just this. They talk about a lot of the modern struggles that we have in terms of what it means to be successful, how to find meaningful projects, how to work on really important things while also not driving yourself crazy because of a desire for those. This is a pod that I come back to from time to time because it allows for a reconstruction of peace of mind. And the way that this episode starts is Elizabeth reads a poem, a Celtic prayer of approach, talking about this idea of no cherished outcomes, an undefended heart to your meeting place. I'll not negotiate by withholding. I'm not subject to disappointment. I have no cherished outcome. Now, what does that mean, no cherished outcome? Does that mean to you, I'll just go with the flow and I don't care what's to come? Or does it mean something else? And I think once you dive deeper into that question, you can begin to unravel a variety of different answers. So getting into the overall prayer and the Celtic approach, you can see the full prayer here of how that impacts the the way that you show up to things and the way that you uh, are presenting yourself. And like I said, we're in an era of optimization. We're in an era where it's a lot of what have you done for me lately, and you begin to analyze relationships through a lens of almost, am I getting value out of this? But the term value is intentionally vague because it's not just a monetary value. It's not just money, right? Like not every relationship should be a business relationship. And this podcast really helps uncover that for me. Especially in a time when you are working a lot and you're continuing to really try to grow this practice and this project that I've been journeying on over the last few years, but uh, taking a step back and using this way of approach to find the fun in things. I had a tweet the other week where I said I just reminded myself to have fun, and in a in an environment where people are constantly talking about hacks and things to game the system, that was a serious hack that I was able to find. Just have fun because we put so much responsibility on ourselves and on others for these outcomes that we desire. But it's important to remind ourselves that sometimes it's not so serious and sometimes it just is what it is. Like the question at the bottom here of how are you complicit in creating the conditions that you say you don't want is such a profound question that Tim and Elizabeth talk about because they're two super successful and optimized people. I mean, Tim is basically Mr. Optimizer. He wrote the 4 Hour Work Week uh, in 20 years ago, and now when you look at that book today, it's like everything basically came true. Every aspect of the 4 Hour Work Week that he was using that seemed novel in 2004 or whatever it was is now like just standard practice. It's a it's a released and spread into the cultural zeitgeist of like, yeah, you should want to have ownership around your work, and you should want to be able to have the flexibility to work from wherever you want and have cash generating assets. And this was seen as novel when Tim first wrote it, but it's really just that's because of how he was able to see into what the future of work, I guess, could look like, and what the future of the internet and leverage. And now it's coming to a head where he has even gone so deep into this optimization that he's like almost trying to go back. I mean, Tim, he wrote a really insightful essay at the start of this year where he was saying how he was over optimizing and overdoing it. And I think that that's something that's really hard to come to grips to, especially for somebody like him, because you could see how his identity and what he does, how he shows up for others, becomes such a like foundational pillar of who he probably is to not only just many people but also himself. He feels like he has to show up a certain way, but when you come back to having a no cherished outcome and having a a true understanding of how you're complicit in the conditions you say you don't want, then he was able to shed that, and he was able to put out this piece that kind of gives a different view in what and how Tim is operating on. He's gone through the mud of that optimization work, and now it seems like he's trying to find the ever so difficult balance that we're all looking for. But I think that coming back to just where we are and where I am, of like, what if I didn't have a cherished outcome? What if I just did what felt right? And there's a lot of yoga philosophy within that of following your dharma and what feels right and trusting your gut, and that's for sure important. But it's also it allows you, or at least it allows myself to not have a sense of disappointment by putting expectations on others. And I think that is a really important piece to this way of approach, to this way of operating within others, because it kind of leads into boundaries, which Elizabeth talks about a lot in this episode. But it also just allows for like a sense of calm and a sense of appreciation and gratitude for what you do get. So when you come into a relationship, whether it's a new friendship or a new romantic partnership, it creates a sense of lightness where you have this almost burden that's taken off, because there are all relationships where it does feel, it can start to feel one-sided, because you give, you give, and you never get anything in return. And that ultimately could brew resentment, because it's like, I'm giving so much energy, I'm giving so much time, I'm giving so much effort into a friendship or into a relationship, and if it's not reciprocated, then you start to blame yourself and you start to ask why, and then you can even press harder and do more and say, hey, why won't this person uh you know give what I want? Why can't they read my mind? And that's because it's as ridiculous as it sounds. Nobody can read anybody's mind. So obviously communication is important in that, and being able to lay out your thoughts and lay out your ideas, but also some of those expectations that you may have might just not be fair. And if they're not fair, from zooming out from like a 10,000-foot lens, then it it allows for a sobering moment to remove that cherished outcome, and to come to new relationships, or even refresh that particular relationship without a cherished outcome, and just to have fun. And then once you take that weight off, then it allows the other things to really unravel, I would believe, because maybe you're like, oh, I don't need this anymore, or it's not working, or I don't have to put myself out there, or strain myself in order to do it. And that allows you to take responsibility. It allows you to use the foundational agreement of this poem, of where you'll be respectful, you'll be generous, but you don't have to be overextended, and you don't need a cherished outcome. And I think that that's just such an important way to get into the idea of relationships, and the idea of how people will navigate through this world, because we are, in a sense, at least someone like myself, striving for approval, right? It's the people pleaser in many of us that wants to be successful, wants to be liked, wants to be appreciated, and all of these really foundational aspects of a relationship that feel good because you feel like you're doing something right. But is that actually true, especially when you start to talk about boundaries, and especially when you start to talk about your relationship with yourself? So what's what's the podcast talks a lot about is this idea of two-way prayer. Uh, I haven't necessarily integrated a two-way prayer practice into my life, um, but I also kind of have, and what I mean by that is it's really just a journaling practice. It's a journaling practice where you're writing to yourself, and you're talking to yourself in a way that you want to hear what's coming from you, and it allows you to disconnect, and it allows you to almost let like the spirit take over in a sense. And I've done a lot of journaling throughout my time. I have plenty of notebooks that are filled with a variety of different stream of conscious gibberish, goals, notes, ideas, thoughts, prayers, etc. And I think what's unique about the two-way prayer that Elizabeth talks about is it really just changes the agreement when you come to that paper, where you're not writing to yourself as you, of saying like, I want to do this, I want to do that. It's more writing to yourself, but from a different perspective of you. So what that means, and what I mean when I say that, is oftentimes when I'm journaling, I'm saying like, I want to X, or I am looking to Y. But I think with two-way prayer, which is powerful in this sense, is you could say you are X and you are Y. And that is a change in a lot of the conversation. Uh it's really a insightful distinction of how do you feel about yourself? How do you feel about yourself versus how do you feel towards yourself? And this question about versus towards, it's one of those small changes in language that can unlock a very different way in how you view really your work and how you're showing up. Because how do I feel about myself right now is very different than how I feel towards myself. Because one of them is like I'm in it. I am me in my body, so I know how I feel about myself right now. I know if I'm tired or if I'm stressed or if I'm anxious, but how do I feel towards myself? It's like it's more of a mirror practice. It's, well, if I were coming to conversation with Jack, then I would feel towards myself that I'm really showing up in a positive light, and I'm showing up in a way that is trying to be welcoming and accepting of others. And that becomes a big practice for letter what she calls letters from for love, or two-way prayer, or honestly just regular journaling, is because it unlocks a way of life that can be simply a little bit more gentle with yourself. And I think being gentle with yourself has nothing really to do with like masculine and feminine. It's more just acceptance of the current situation and what are you going to do to solve it. So I was having a conversation the other day of like, how do you integrate a lot of these practices into your life? And I kind of had an answer that I would think falls more on the like masculine side of like, you just have to do it. Like, if I, for example, recording this, if there's resistance for why I'm recording, sometimes I have valid reasons. Sometimes I need to listen deeper to the episode and um, take more detailed notes and kind of formulate my thoughts. Even though I've listened to many of these podcasts multiple times, it still is a process of digesting and synthesizing. And that's a legitimate reason to not want to put out work that is um, going to be feeling complete. But then other times there's reasons that I don't really are hard to explain. I don't know if it's a lack of conviction. I don't know if it's a lack of just wanting to do it and speaking to a camera in front of myself, which is a little awkward and uncomfortable at times, saying something dumb. But those are like reasons that are not valid. It's like, what are you actually afraid of? So then I've said in this conversation of how do I integrate it? Well, I just do it. I flip the switch in my brain and I say, all right, we're doing it. And the same goes for like exercise and working out and all of these difficult decisions and what may seem like risks in the moment. You just have to do it. It's never going to be perfect. And I think that is a real masculine urge and masculine energy. So when I say be gentle with yourself, it's more understand why the the decisions or the risks that you're hoping to take you haven't taken yet, and unpack those. And using a practice like journaling is something that can really help uncover that, because once you start asking these questions and you come in with an open mind, you can start to slowly make changes. And then it becomes just you, and it becomes, what is the one thing that is holding me back? And I, I have, like I said, done many journaling practices throughout throughout my life, and often, not often, but sometimes I'll fall into a trap where it just feels like I'm just literally scribbling on a page to get the task done, and to just say that I journaled today, and I'm just scribbling, 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 and it's like I become aware that I'm just saying the same things over, and this is all just a whole crock of nothing. So why don't I just do something, right? Like stop, use that or move that inertia, like get the momentum rolling, and it it then allows and creates an open opportunity for just learning and education and experience versus necessarily improvement, because that becomes the byproduct. Where if you think that there's a way to journal right, or to practice these self-awareness and kind of self reflective practices, if you think there's a way to do it right, then I just don't necessarily agree. There obviously are practices and techniques that can support and provide different unlocks across a variety of different things, but it's also sometimes just the act of doing it and the act of sitting here and talking into the mic, or listening to that podcast that I know is going to discuss an idea or a topic that is challenging to me. That is enough, and that becomes a non-cherished outcome. So it creates a new sense of calm and presence in the room, and it talks about how you are beginning to integrate these things. And Elizabeth says here is like, martial artists know that the most relaxed person in the room or in the conflict wins, and that's because there's that confidence and that presence and that knowledge and of knowing their value, to allow for a flow to come and reach that flow state. And when you reach that flow state, and when you don't have that desire or that requirement for a super specific niche, probably ego driven outcome, then you can just let things progress naturally. And you can understand, this is what I'm trying to get out of this situation. And everything else beyond that becomes a byproduct. It becomes a test or a analysis of the ego. And if things don't work out in a way where you need to set up boundaries, and you need to basically call it off or end it or whatever, then that's okay, because you've done the work, and you've had the just overall acceptance and confidence to do exactly that. And this becomes a practice of relaxation, and it becomes a practice of knowing and understanding your place in your work. Um, Elizabeth talks how she basically picks projects and what she's working on. She calls herself a relaxed woman. She's going into, different, like, gender roles and things like that. That stuff's all cool. It's not necessarily what interests me in terms of this podcast, but there is a lot of that in it. If you're looking to listen, especially for the female listeners out there, she has an interesting approach to um, her just persona and who she shows up as a woman. But I do think, in terms of how she's showing up and using these three pillars of boundaries, priorities, and mysticism, it is a really good way to think about how you want to spend your energy and your time, because boundaries are a topic that I'm definitely going to do a deep dive into. I've listened to a bunch of, like, Joe Hudson podcasts, and Joe Dispenza, and just other really incredible life coaches and executive coaches on this idea of boundaries. And this is just one of them, where you really need to take yourself as priority, and you can't let it comes back to the people pleasing stuff of, like, what are you what are you allowing, and what are you complicit in, that is draining your energy and that isn't serving you in a way of value. And then, of course, priorities of, like, what is important to your work and to where you're trying to be and what you're trying to do, what of overall values, of overall desires, and because, you don't want desires to run everything in your life, but of course there are dreams and goals that you should aspire for. So the that becomes like this basically a pie chart that you can create of, like, how are you separating these three to create that um that outcome, that you may not cherish, but you still strive for. Because the last one then becomes mysticism, which is a little bit more on the woo woo side. And it's a little bit more of, like, what feels right, or what is that purpose, and in terms of what you're trying to get out. And Elizabeth tells a really incredible story in this podcast where she was in California, I believe, for some work or speaking engagement, and she talked about how she just had like a morning off and was walking down the street, and there was a guy on a ladder that she felt and had this feeling that it might be a dangerous situation. And this guy was high up on a ladder. She was just by herself, probably like I'm imagining like, with AirPods in and whatever, like listening to music or something, maybe just taking in the nature. But she held the ladder for him for what she described like a good amount of time, like 30 minutes or so. And then once he started to come down, she just got up and left. Um, which she discusses how she didn't even she wasn't even sure if the guy on the ladder saw her or noticed her. They didn't have any conversation. There was no like, "Oh, aren't you gonna thank me for saving your life?" Haha. It was just a very uh, serendipitous moment that she talks about, and she says that maybe that's why she was put on this earth, and that's so like that's so beautiful. Uh, in all honesty, because everybody thinks about why were they put on this earth, and a lot of people will jump to like, oh, I'm destined to do great things, or I want to do great things, or I want to do this and this. um and that can be really stressful at times and anxiety inducing, and for sure a cherished outcome. But but if it is something as small as just holding a ladder for a stranger to make sure that he gets home to his family at the end of the day with no medical accidents or no disasters or catastrophes, then that is like a really beautiful way of looking at the little things in your life and taking in the small moments and allowing to live in the present moment. Um, there's a there's a quote that I love that I heard from one of my yoga teachers, and I share this in some of my classes as well. Of like a lot of people, they'll think that they need to meditate and do a lot of like pranayama breath work to see the blues and the yellows of when you close your eyes and you have these out of body, like almost non-conscious or subconscious experiences. But I think the best way to describe why we should meditate is not to see those blues and yellows in here and when your eyes are closed, but so you can see the blues and yellows of the flowers when you're walking down the side of the street. Because those moments of providing a real sense of just gratitude and understanding of beauty and seeing nature in its purest form, unprompted, can allow you to zoom out and think about where you are stressing and pushing in areas that you don't need to. And that ends with Elizabeth talking about project she's taking on and extending herself, and how she was taking a break from some work because she didn't have a calling. But she noted that when we, in this context, she's talking about God, when they've got something for her to do, then she'll be notified. But until then, rest. And I that becomes a such an important piece of rest, and I'm not talking about like recovery rest here, which is important, and it has gotten a lot of very much deserved like science and appreciation over the last few um, few years. But when I say rest, it's more like the energetically resting of you don't need to press and push in areas that you're not fully committed to. um Naval talks how we should work like a lion, and when we're ready to go, we sprint and then we rest. And this is I interpreted it as the same idea of not just doing work or writing or doing these things just to say that you are, but to actually step back, reassess, come back to presence and back to self. And that can ultimately provide the bandwidth and the understanding for when the time comes and when that door does need to be kicked open for that next opportunity, you'll be good to go. So I think that that was just such a insightful podcast episode. It's not too long. I believe it's around like 2 hours or so. Um, Definitely recommend giving it a listen. And I'll leave you with just the question of, where is some place in your life uh, that you are pushing for a desired or a cherished outcome that maybe it doesn't necessarily deserve it or doesn't necessarily need it? And if that is no longer serving you, how can you reassess that relationship or that opportunity to a way where you can then once again find joy in it? And once you find joy, then maybe you'll fall back into a much more positive and um, fruitful fruitful experience with it. So thank you, Aho. Getting back on the grind this week, and we'll be putting out much more content to come. I got a lot of episodes in the queue. Stay updated at jacklesser.me. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, all that good stuff. But I appreciate you for joining this episode. With Tim Ferriss and Elizabeth Gilbert. And have a great day. Aho.